name is Dr. Randy Moss. I'm a certified fit trainer, a practicing psychologist, and have been working in the field for about 30 years. I do a lot of system change and implementation, and today we're going to use MyOutcomes and feedback-informed treatment to create a culture of continuous performance improvement. And this is an important aspect to understand that we have an obligation for efficiency and effectiveness, both for our funders and primarily for those fellow citizens who come to us. I'd like to wish you all a happy Cinco de Mayo, and I want to let you know that this has been graciously supported by MyOutcomes, who has the largest database of ORS and SRS in the world, as well as a very user-friendly format and dashboard. A couple of housekeeping things. I'm repeating myself because I was talking to myself. Questions are to be posed in the chat room, and then we'll have some question and answer afterwards for about 10 or 15 minutes after the end of our 30 minutes. Please remember that if you need a copy of this, I understand that MyOutcomes is going to have this webinar recorded. And because we are in such short time, we won't have a chance to have a lot of interaction. This is a larger idea and concept than usual. One of the things we want to talk about is how feedback signals enhance the process of supervision. We're going to define how supervision works, and it also can be used to improve reflective practices. And reflective practices or mindful practices have been shown to not only spawn deliberate practice and error-centric or looking at our mistakes as a way for expertise. So we're going to go on and just talk a little bit about a review here for a moment. First of all, everything that has to do with feedback-informed treatment or the use of the ORS and the SRS happens within a culture of feedback. So feedback and data-driven are not components of your daily work or the environment of your business. That is something that needs to be looked at. This is not something that can be imposed, but it must be evolved. So as a quick review, feedback-informed treatment is more of an attitude, and then there are some skill sets that go along in getting continuous feedback from those who seek our services. That is the trick of continuous versus point-in-time feedback. It is a necessary and essential action that needs to happen very routinely, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. You all should be familiar with, or will become more familiar with, the two macro indicators. The ORS, which is the service seeker's perception of their functioning and real-life world, and it is a measure of their distress. And we know that as distress goes down, engagement and practice of the issues that are, the skills that are being transmitted in therapy increase. And then the next one is the SRS, which is the session rating scale, which is the service seeker's perception of the relationship between the client and the practitioner based on basic three ideas of alliance. We'll talk a little bit more about those, but those three alliance ideas are shared goals, shared methods, and their perception of the qualities and allegiances of the therapist. And then the last one is that it gives us some objective clinical data that narrows our intervention. Again, we want to look at these three basic things. So what we're trying to say is, using MyOutcomes, who was the sponsor of this, kind of looks like this process to me. The client comes in at the first, they do an ORS, which lets us know what's going on with them, kind of from their perspective. It is not somehow interpreted through our filters of our own bias, our own prejudice, our own theories of practice, or our own cultures, but it's really their perception, and that's the most important. And that helps us figure on our kinds of interventions, and then we get a SRS score to see how we're getting along really well. We put that into MyOutcomes, and then we have some chance to look at what these data say to us in both personal reflection for becoming our best, and then we can go back and in two different ways we use this data from the dashboard. One is in supervision, both individual and group supervision, as a method for augmenting and strengthening what is known as alliance, which has been shown by Duncan and Miller and others, Lambert, to be the most powerful component, not the only component, but the most powerful component. And it helps us narrow that down, as well as going back directly to the client and engaging their voice in their world, and then that goes back to reflecting in this overarching process. As a review of the dashboard of MyOutcomes, just some quick ones I've highlighted here for you. The yellow line is the individual session rating, outcome rating scale for an individual session. And then there is the red line, which is a rating scale. And then there's a black line that you can see on the far right that is expected treatment response. This is based upon thousands and thousands of data points, and it is calculated to figure out with other clients who had the same beginning ORS score across a series of sessions, what would be expected for improvement and meaningful improvement. Above there, you can see that there is the orange line with diamonds, and that's the individual ratings, session rating scale. And that's where the client is giving us feedback about how the relationship or that therapeutic space between us is being perceived by them. And then we have the date of service and the cutoff date. So that's kind of a quick review of this. Let me talk a little bit about supervision, since that's what we're talking about. And I have some ideas about what supervision is not. And we need to make supervision more prominent in our practices. It's one of the first things gets cut in times of funding shortages. So let's talk about the first one, which is in the beginning was a supervisor, and he created all of the supervisees in the same image. I call this the Genesis Project. What supervision really is not about having someone be and do it exactly like me, but rather is helping the supervisee to find their own voice within the legal, ethical, moral, and effective methods for this client at this moment on these issues. It is not the ascension to the Mount of Wisdom. If supervision is a place in which you do this, don't do that, we are robbing the supervisee and therefore the client from that dynamic that happens. It is not a complaint or gritch session, although there is some of that gets sprinkled into most all of them. It should not be focused on that. It is not and should not be fully oriented or wholly oriented toward administrative demands, since compliance with accreditation and Medicaid or Medicare and funders' requirements, much of supervision has evolved into administrative oversight. And direct clinical work across the United States as a supervision aspect has taken second run. It should not be a self-selected attempt at either looking good or dealing with successful cases or ones that have already fallen off. I propose that good supervision should not be random or hallway drive-by case consultation, which is most of the truth for many of us extremely busy clinicians. And it is not a court of judgment that should erode away self-efficacy and debase the supervisee or aggrandize the supervisor. In fact, in a culture of feedback, honest feedback between each other should be the case. What really is meaningful is it's a time to combine experience and theory for the client. It should be regularly scheduled with an exchange of questions and answers that focus on the client. This is where the data comes in to help us do that. It's a learning space. It should also be a place that all involved should be able to uncover personal biases and reflect upon their interaction or their impact on what we're doing. It should be a safe arena to admit successful failure. I'm not a big fan of the word failure, but in this context, what that means is that I'm not the right person with this client, and I need to be able to accept that more clearly. So what makes that meaningful? Well, evidences are showing here, although there are not a lot of good research out there on supervision, lots of theories, but the few that have been done say that what we need to do is have data to confront our clinical judgment. And what that means is that sometimes we have impulses of first impressions, or we have, this reminds me of XYZ client 5 years ago, and it turned out bad, and we have these impression biases that come up. It should focus on cases that are challenging, failing, or difficult. Primarily that. We also need to get strokes for the ones we're doing well with, but for this case, the data helps us focus directly on the ones who are more likely to drop out, which is the ugly underbelly of our business. 47% drop out before the fourth session. And feedback-informed supervision allows us to also have this culture of feedback going on here. It's more than satisfaction, but it does play into professional self-efficacy, and it should be a positive experience. The relationship, therefore, of supervisors should not be top-down or based on power, but should have some mutual respect for differences in our accountability and responsibility, understanding from a supervisor's perspective, which I've done for many years, is that I ultimately have some legal responsibilities, and I have responsibilities to supervisee to help guide them in their own personal development. But the person who has the most influence is the person who spends the next 50 minutes or the next group, which is the supervisee. So we need to make sure that we understand the shared accountability and responsibilities. It needs to be structured, it needs to be truthful. Truth is easier with data than impression or philosophy. We must have shared goals and methods. Those are the basis of alliance with our clients. It makes sense and seems to be a reasonable extension of this, that in supervision, those same things need to be happening there. And honest and safe feedback. I want to take 1 second and talk a little bit of what does it mean to be safe. Safe should be non-attacking. It should have the same kind of challenging and critical feedback that is given in a method that is hearable and respondable by the supervisee. So what does it mean then to use this fit data in supervision? Well, it means that we have a routine time and place. It only transpires when we have the data. So if people don't bring their ORS or SRS data when we are using FIT, then we really don't have supervision happening. It primarily focuses on what the data says. If the ORS score is below their estimated treatment response, we need to take that for face value instead of writing a narrative about it. And we can use this in group or individual format. So what which way for supervision for our client, for our supervisees. First of all, we are going to review outcome trends comparing the estimated treatment. That's just straightforward. If they aren't meeting it, then it's kind of a thumbs down, and we need to take a look at the 3 different things we need to look at. We can review different outcome particulars. There might be one area that seems to be particularly struggling or distressful for the client. We need then to take cue from that and enhance our interventions around those issues. Then we analyze the session rating scales to figure out if we're okay there with our alliance. And then before we start wondering about diagnosis or resistance, we need to ask ourselves the following. Which of the SRS particulars were depressed, and how do we address them? If none of them were depressed, how do we engage? So this means somebody gives us all 40s or 39s. We need to ask them how to reveal our deficits, especially when the ORS is not going up. And what might I be doing? This is about reflection. What might I be doing to impede this case? In reflecting practice, first of all, we need to know our biases and our prejudice. Neutrality really is a delusion. We always remain ourselves. When we know our own stuff, we know when we react to different individuals, different diagnoses, different situations. We also allows us for personal preparation when we know our own stuff and we come up with strategies. It also helps with having data to understand that our intuitions and our experience guts are important, but they're insufficient. The data suggests that we're about a coin flip on guessing who's going to get better and who's not going to get better. We need to manage our impressions better, and so we don't have a premature foreclosure, so we have a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we need to understand that most of our intuitions have a little bit of a self-serving or a controlling component. We need to listen to understand. Everybody has their story, their own narrative. We need to learn how to teach our supervisees, and we do this by modeling and supervision, by gathering information to hear preferences. We look at exchange for nonverbal information. We reflect on the adaptive nature of their strengths. It also gets out of the routine of said, I did this, they did this, I did that kind of structure, or wondering about if I interpreted their narrative first. I think we escape that by using the data as the primary and the narrative as adjunct. Resist interpreting dropping in ORS as resistance, or in some places I've had supervisees say, well, finally we've got them to the basement where we can start to work. But what we know is with increased distress is greater likelihood to no-show, greater likelihood to have a failing case. And so we need to have data to mediate and modulate our work focus. It also requires us to successfully not help some clients. You are not a match for everybody. The research says about 50% of all clients do not connect very well with their first therapist. So we need to dispense with what I call the grad school lie that I can love all, be all, serve all. Be honest and quick in recognizing the limitations. Data is the easiest and most reliable way of knowing that I'm not dancing well with this client. And don't personalize this lack of helpfulness. Actually, in recognizing that you're not helpful is a type of expert help that is great. And we don't demonize the client by saying if they would have just done what I wanted them to do. Please don't go it alone. Always have supervision. The supervisor should have a supervisee. And don't be embarrassed when the data tells us that we need to do something different. We need to understand that it is the client's voice and the client who is doing the work. They're the one who holds all the energy for change. So what do we know about the qualities of therapists and what we are trying to attempt to do in professional growth through supervision and how data works on this? First of all, we need to have confidence. This is known as allegiance, meaning the client sees that we are confident in what we're doing and that we know that it has some application to them. We need to have empathy, which is a shared emotional connection to a human condition. We need to be able to shift our perspectives and synthesize multiple points of view. That's what should distinguish us from those who seek our services, is our ability to walk around a problem instead of be stuck on the problem. And honesty, this engages others, balances our expectations, clarifies the rules of our relating. And this goes both with our outcomes and with our supervision. So what do we need to do? FIT produces a minimum but rich information data set. It helps us understand about therapeutic relationships. One of the things we all want to be is super shrinks. We all have this need to feel competent. These desires sometimes create a pattern of avoidance of the voice of the client, and sometimes misinterprets or reinterprets for us their generated data. So when we reframe our ego's desires to be the best I can be with this client right now, this opens us up without prejudice to the feedback and without personal embarrassment or decrease in our self-efficacy or professional development. So there are many types of supervisions that can arise from the MyOutcomes generated dashboard. Again, the typical one is individual client-based, understanding if the client is progressing or decompensating, and can tune us in with a red hand, yellow hand, or green hand on how we should be thinking about this. But I want to talk just in the last about 6 minutes here of a couple of other things that I find as interesting that can facilitate and augment supervisor and supervisee and supervisor professional growth that would also help us in clinical management and effectiveness and efficiency. So the first one of this is the SRS and the diagnosis. You can query on MyOutcomes over a pattern, and I see a pattern as 3 or 4 sessions where you have something that seems to be typically lower if you are eliciting this feedback in a positive way, or more uneven or erratic in a handful of cases. And this would be over when you have a group of 25 or 30 cases, and you have 5 or 6 of them that you just don't seem to get good feedback. Either they all give you total 40s, which is one indicator or signal, but they give you significantly lower. Now, significantly could be as little as 1 or 2, maybe 2 or 3 points. And maybe we need to take a look and see, even though MyOutcomes does not gather this diagnostics, would be to see if there is a grouping of categories of these less favorable cases. And what are the characteristics that are shared among these cases? It could be gender, it could be age, it could be a variety of kinds of things we would want to look at. Diagnostics, GAF score, even though DSM-5 doesn't have a GAF score, those kinds of things we would want to look at them. And what we look at then is what kind of education, self-education and directed deliberate practice from our supervisor could we do to learn more about both the qualities and responses of this particular group of shared population of shared characteristics, how to engage with them in a different way, or it might come to the point where we understand that this is a group that I am better off referring forthright without engaging too much in therapy. So I see this one as a very valuable tool for practitioners in both supervision and self-reflection. The next one is taking a look at the dates. It registers the date of services. Again, if a pattern emerges on your SRS and there is something particularly happens on Mondays or on Fridays or only in the afternoons, again, we don't usually think about this, but we are a limited resource with a limited amount of energies. We might have our own stuff that's going on. Am I fatigued, preoccupied with outside things? What could be what could I be doing that's impeding this? Those kinds of signals actually help us ask those questions in a more routine and structured way. And then we can start to figure out, do we need to refer these clients, these harder clients, to a morning? Do I not do them on Friday afternoon after I've had a 50-hour week? Because each client deserves to have as much of the practitioner available as possible. We can look at some of the dimensions that are depressed on the ORS, and if they're these individual dimensions, how are we missing this area? Why do we continue to go back in? Is it our theory that's driving us? Is our manualized treatment that's driving us to miss this? Or am I misunderstanding what the client is actually telling me there? This gives me a chance to now reflect on structuring my services to attend to this depressed score and the overall outcome rating scale. It also can change some of our components. It helps us understand maybe I'm not the right person, maybe we need to change intensity, maybe we need to change the method, which is part of the SRS. Maybe we just need to add on some things, or maybe we really have just plateaued here, and even though we like each other, it's time for us to kind of move on. So we also know they plot the SRS and the ORS along the way. We can take a look at these, and if the ORS is kind of stuck, again, it goes back on to asking, what are we missing in helping this client experience positive growth? Or have we plateaued? Are the right people or right goals present? Are we devolving into stories or rehashing? Are we into crisis management at every time? These are issues that supervisors can pick up and supervisees can come prepared to talk about, and then they can brainstorm about how to go about this. What we really always need to remember is maybe this time, right now, I need to offer something different than what I offered last time. And the lovely thing about feedback-informed, ongoing, continuous feedback to us is that I get the material immediately, and I can change as a clinician, and I can help as a supervisor, my supervisees see the need for reflection, for more engagement of the client's voice, more clarification about what they mean in all of this stuff. So the significant change in the presentation of materials or the skills to address all of that. So those seem to be the end goals of just briefly around supervision using MyOutcomes, the dashboard, the signals that are generated, and how to turn them into reflective supervision and practice on the part of all of us. And then I just have a couple of little further readings for you. Reese is particularly important. Erickson is about deliberate practice, and it is error-centric, meaning it teaches us to take a look at the ones we're not doing well. The violinist trying to get vibrato, the trills on the piano, left-handed layups for right-handed basketball players, all kinds of expertise which we're all trying to get. But remember that a majority of us aren't super shrinks, and that we need to give ourselves kind of a humble appraisal about what is true is about 50% of our clients aren't going to connect with us, and but we need to be able to connect as good as we can, as soon as we can, move them on to somebody else. Any questions? That was our 30 minutes and a quick take a breath. I don't see any coming up in the chat line. Nobody has written any questions?
Hi, Randy. Cindy here. Hi, everyone. It's Cindy Hansen from MyOutcomes. I'm looking very, and I'm seeing, actually we do have a number of questions, but people put them in the question box, not in the chat box. And I don't suppose you can see that. So let me just get my reading glasses on here and give you some of these questions.
Okay.
Just open them up. How best to begin that conversation with the supervisee? Can there be a scripted beginning to break the ice?
As far as using data, I think this goes to how an agency implements the culture of feedback initially. But yes, there can be a scripted one, and I think the same kind of way that you might engage your client, you can engage your supervisee by saying, together I would like to do something maybe different than what you're used to from grad school or other things. And one way I like to practice helping supervisees meet their potential is by using the data that is generated from their client in regard to their ongoing interventions or interactions. And so I think you can take it from that perspective. And then also ask, just as you would with a client, and again, I'm not trying to make these equivalents, I'm simply saying that the wording works the same way, in that you can say, what are you hoping to get out of supervision? And what way, what method are you best able to understand my suggestions, my challenges, and my compliments to you, so that you are not using one size fits all, because we know we're all individuals. So that's how I would start it out.
Okay, great, thanks. Another one, we're just starting to use the SRS and ORS, and one of our team members is afraid that clients may game the system to appear better than they may be.
Well, again, I think sometimes clients have ulterior motives for a lot of kinds of things they do. Gaming the system, maybe on an individual session at a time, but again, supervision, if we're focusing on this part, looks at larger trends, even though you are going to evaluate this individual client. So you might look at the system, his SRS score, and see him as either not giving good feedback, which is a majority of the case, or you know, some reading you in that way there, and but then it's going to be reflected in what their ORS score looks like. I think that that's an anomaly and not something to get extremely worried about.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of the questions were about the sound in the beginning. And then people are looking for information about getting your slides, and so everyone will be receiving a copy of this, a recording either tomorrow or the next day, depending on which recording method we use. And also how to access the SRS, someone is asking, because they're currently only using the ORS. So if you're working on your own, you can go and get a paper and pencil license from Dr. Scott Miller's website or Dr. Barry Duncan's website for free. If you're using MyOutcomes, well, the SRS is in there, and so I would perhaps talk to somebody about how you could access that and start using it as well. And it's common. I mean, there's lots of people who have chosen to only use the outcome rating scale. And I'd just like to say thank you, Randy, for pointing out the value that this brings to supervision. And I think we're just about out of time.
We are.
So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for attending.
And thank you, Cindy and MyOutcomes, for sponsoring this, and for those who participated. I hope that this at least gave you a seed to think about how to enhance supervision to create better outcomes for our clients, and therefore for our agencies, and therefore for our funders. So have a good Cinco de Mayo, and hope to see you another time. If you want to get hold of me, you can get hold of MyOutcomes Cindy, and she can hook you up if you would like to talk to me directly.
All right, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.